We look and we see the condition of African people today. On the bottom, as Garvey noted so many years ago, everywhere he went, the African man, the black man, is on the bottom of the economic, social, and political ladder. Those circumstances have not changed. In many instances, they are getting worse. We will find, if you go to Barnes and Nobles and some of the others, numbers of books asking, can the African survive? Our very survival into the next century is in question. I often note that our children looked at the series Star Wars, and I noticed that in the beginning of that series, there were no black people in the movie at all. And I noted that whenever then the European looks into the future, there is not a black man there. They had animals, robots, and everything else, operating rocket ships and so forth, but not a black man was there. Which means then, ladies and gentlemen, those who think that they're in control of creating the future do not see the African man there at all. This means then ultimately, if we look at the task that our children must perform, that the basic task of the European child is conservative. To conserve and maintain the advantages that the European already has, and to enhance those advantages. So that means their rearing in their homes, in their communities. That means their education then is basically conservative. Because since they already have the advantage, they seek then to maintain that advantage. When we then look at the African child, we see a very different future. And I've often said then that future is revolutionary. Given the condition that our people are in today, our education cannot be then conservative. If we are to save our people from starvation, if we are to remove our people from the bottom of economic, political, and social ladders, then we must overturn the current orders of the world. That in and of itself makes it very clear that they cannot receive the same education as the white child. They cannot be reared the same way the white child is reared, because they have very, very different tasks to perform. It is when we recognize then the future task that our children must perform, and when we reflect on that task, we then use those future tasks and knowledge of those future tasks to reorganize our present circumstances, to reorganize the schools, to reorganize our relations one to the other, to reorganize our perception of ourselves, and yea, even to reorganize our history, because history is alive and history is present. As I pointed out in Newark of last week, history is the present and history is the future. In European systems, we have a linear approach to the world, an approach that makes one believe that history is something that is left behind. History is something that can be forgotten. No, ladies and gentlemen, history is never left behind. In the human mind, the history is now, and in the human mind, the history is present. For the future is made of things that were made in the past. Without past, there is no future. In order for us to be in the condition we're in, we must literally be turned backwards as a people. We must be reversed, because this world can only be ruled in terms of lies. When you have a minority of people, a 10% of the world's population, a 10% of the world's population whose lands are not inherently wealthy, whose lands have no natural resources, ruling over the other 90%, then that other 90% must be kept out of its mind. That other 90% must exist in a state of deception. That other 90% must live then in a reversed situation and in a backward situation. Therefore, that other 90% must accept the lie as truth and the truth as lies. I've said that the major differentiation between Eurocentrically oriented psychology and Afrocentrically oriented psychology under oppression is that it is a political necessity that the black man be out of his mind. It is not merely the result of the interaction you had with your mother or your father. It is not merely the result of the absence of your father in the home or the absence of role models in your communities or all of these other things we hear day in and day out. It is not merely the result of that. It is ultimately the result of the need for the European to maintain power and domination. And these things are but an effect of that need. You had 2 Sundays ago a bunch of Negroes trying to explain the disparity between the education of black females and black males. A pathetic situation. Pitiful. They went to Yale, went to the University of Chicago. The experts that they had what? Set up. And of course, those experts gave them the answers that they wanted to hear. And then they are presented to African people as experts. But if they'd gone to the people themselves, I'm sure they would have got a different set of names and a different set of people. But those people did not appear in that paper. So we get people putting effects as causes. You say, oh, it's the absence of the black male model in the neighborhood. But how does the absence of the black male model occur? Why is it necessary for that absence to be there? That is never dealt with and discussed. It never gets around. So you have a bunch of experts discussing secondary situations and minor situations and making them appear to be major. That is why they're teaching at the University of Chicago and Yale. Because those institutions are just as much and more of a part of European domination as any other institution. And yet we say that they give us a good education. And we talk and we feel so good when we send our children there without any African consciousness. They are being sent there to be destroyed. So then we have to then look at the schools, because it is in the schools, it is in the colleges and universities that the black man and woman, the black child, the black boy and girl must be taught to be dumb. That is the purpose of the schools. Let us recognize it. If the European can only exist to the extent that we are not in control of our common sense, that we are not in control of our identity, that we are not in control of a shared collective activity level, if the European can only exist and dominate as a result of the fact that we are not in love with ourselves and with our people, if the European can only be in control as a result of the fact that we have not fully developed our technological thinking capacities and the ability to concretize those capacities, then why do you think those abilities and those personality characteristics are going to be taught in European-oriented schools? It doesn't make any sense. The European is not going to teach his enemy to overthrow him, and yet some of us think that that will be the case. There is hardly any African in the world that has ever given a European education. You know, we hear some people talk about, well, that he has a white mind, or he thinks like white folk. Black people are not taught to think like white folk. You can sit in the white university as long as you want to. You'll never be taught to think like a white man. You can even learn the same thing in terms of course content as the white boy and girl, the white student. You can learn it even better. You can come out summa cum laude, and you still have not received a white education. No, sir. You get a Negro education no matter where you go in the system. I wouldn't complain. I often tell people, you know who thinks more like a white man, if you want to use those terms, I'm putting those in parentheses, a Farrakhan. Yeah. Yes. How do we say that? Because you see, if you're taught to think like a white man, and like white people, you want your own nation. That's what white folk want. You'd want to own your own neighborhoods. That's the way white folk think. You'd want to control your own economy. That's the way white folk think. You'd want to have your own army. That's the way white folk think, ladies and gentlemen. These people going to these colleges don't think like white folk. They don't come out determined to control their destiny. They don't come out determined to create their own nations and places in the world. They don't come out determined to control military strength and economic strength and other strength. They are coming out the same way their slave great-grandparents came out. That is, to be servants and to be highly educated servants. That is why a Farrakhan frightens them, because they see themselves in a Farrakhan who says, I don't want to sleep with your women. I don't want to marry your women. I don't want to live among you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. You're dirty, rotten, and regressed as a people. You represent a destructive force in the world, and we are going to remove you from power. And we are here to see that your influence on the world ceases and is put to an end. We are here to take rightful control of the wealth that is under the lands of our people and take rightful control of our minds. We are here to put you in your 10% place in the world itself. They see that. Where are you getting that kind of education? In the Yales and Harvards? And yet, ladies and gentlemen, that's the only kind of education that's worth anything. I've often said there that the function of education is not to get jobs and all this other baloney you hear every day. Secondary. The ultimate function of education is to secure the survival of a people. What good would it do you to know computer engineering and all the other stuff if you can be blown away at any moment by another people? If you're manipulated by another people? If the other people continue to maintain the instruments and the power of production? What does it mean to have knowledge when AIDS can be let loose on the African community and destroy our communities? Knowledge is not enough. Knowledge must be welded to purpose. It must be welded to a sense of peoplehood. It must be welded to a sense of destiny. And that is when it becomes protective of a people. You may fill your head with knowledge and skills all you want to, but you can be destroyed by AIDS and all other kinds of germs and all other kinds of warfare and lethal weapons and all other kinds of controlled instruments that the European has in his power. Until that knowledge and education is welded to a sense of nationhood, you are not receiving a good education at all. And therefore, a good education must be measured in terms of the degree to which it protects your survival and interests as a people, and not otherwise. So then we see an attempt then in the European school to distort and to retard the potentialities of the African mind. And the education is designed to do that. And you say to yourself, well, okay, but I know some people who think technologically and this and that, and they got through, you know. Of course, we can say a lot about that. But let us just note this. Sure, you know some people who are very important at NASA, who have made great instruments, perhaps that have flown out on the space shuttle and all of this kind of stuff. Great. But look at the nature of that knowledge and look to where that knowledge is applied and to whose benefit it is applied before you get too happy about it. The chief thing that happens when the African person educated in Eurocentric schools does manage to maintain a mathematical mind, a highly logical, brilliant mind, is often that mind is alienated in the sense that it is permitted to maintain its logical and other functions only at the price of separating that individual emotionally, socially, and culturally from his or her people. So that the knowledge and skills cannot be used in the interest of the people, but in the interest of the enemy. As we often say, when one is alienated so that one's capacities and ability can only be used for whose benefit? The benefit of aliens. That's the source, of strangers, of people other than ourselves. That is the reason why I've said often that the more degrees we get in business administration, the fewer businesses we have to administer. That is the reason I've said often that there is almost a monotonal relationship between the number of blacks and African Americans receiving degrees in economics and the number of Korean businesses on 125th Street. It's no strange coincidence then that as we get more and more MBAs out here, we get more and more Korean businesses on 125th Street. Isn't that a strange situation? Paradoxical, but it's really not that paradoxical. We've noted here now that on 125th Street, there are approaching 70 Korean businesses on that street. You try to name me 20 black ones on that street. And yet there are 95% of the people on that street that shop on that street are black people, African Americans. Where are the MBAs? Where are the PhDs in economics who went to the Wharton School of Finance? Where are those people with their knowledge? Because the knowledge is alienated, it cannot work for African people. It can only work for the other people. So don't be so proud of yourself because you might have gotten through MIT and you may be a mathematical genius. See where and how you can apply that genius in the interest of the survival of African people. If you cannot do so, then you have been alienated and you have become a part of your own oppression. So we can see then this mind is controlled by the nature of its inputs.